What kind of woman brings her ex to an anniversary dinner and still insists she was right? How far can self-righteousness twist into ruin before the quiet man she humiliated reclaims control the lawful way? This is how I turned a celebration of love into the last night of my marriage, and how my husband made sure I could never rewrite the ending. I'm Selene Hartwell, 34, and I honestly thought inviting my ex to our anniversary party would prove how mature I'd become. People are so dramatic about boundaries. Daniel, my husband, always said I lived too much online, that I needed constant validation. Maybe that's true, but what's wrong with wanting to be seen? Julian and I ended years ago, yet he still knows how to make people laugh, how to make a room feel alive. I thought bringing him would show that Daniel and I had nothing to hide, that we'd grown beyond jealousy. Instead, everyone decided I'd crossed some sacred line. The looks, the whispers, it was like they wanted to see me fail. Daniel barely spoke that night. He smiled for photos, raised a toast, and then left without a word. He hasn't come back since. My friends keep saying he'll cool off, that men always overreact. But the quiet this time feels different, heavier. I keep replaying that night, wondering if I miscalculated or if he's just proving my point, that he can't handle a woman who refuses to apologize for being honest. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. It started a week before our anniversary. I was scrolling through old messages when Julian's name popped up. I hadn't spoken to him in almost 2 years, not since he moved to another city. He sent a casual text, something about a new restaurant he'd heard I'd love. I laughed, typing back without thinking. One message turned into 10, then an hour of back and forth. It felt easy, familiar, like slipping into a version of myself I missed. He asked if Daniel and I were still together. I said yes, but added that things had become comfortable, which really meant dull. He joked that maybe he'd crash our anniversary and remind me what fun looked like. The idea stuck in my head. That night, as I folded laundry, I mentioned it to Daniel like it was nothing. I said maybe we should invite Julian to the party, show everyone we were the kind of couple who didn't cling to the past. Daniel looked up from his tablet, frowning slightly. He asked if I was serious. I said yes, smiling, waiting for him to see the humor in it. He didn't. He said it was inappropriate, that anniversaries were for family and close friends, not exes. I laughed and said that sounded possessive. He didn't laugh back. Over the next few days, I kept bringing it up. I told him people admired couples who stayed friends with their exes, that it showed confidence. He said it showed disrespect. I told him he was stuck in the last century. Every time he tried to explain why it bothered him, I twisted his words, said he was jealous, insecure, threatened by a man who wasn't even competition. He stopped arguing after a while, which I took as silent approval. The morning of the party, I stood in front of the mirror for almost an hour. The dress was elegant but low cut. Something Julian always said made me look powerful. Daniel passed behind me on his way to get ready, his reflection crossing mine. He said quietly that he hoped I wouldn't regret tonight. I told him regret was for people who played small. He didn't respond. In the kitchen, I arranged champagne glasses while messaging Julian the event details. He sent a winking emoji and said he couldn't wait to see me. I felt a rush of pride, imagining how composed I'd look introducing him to Daniel, proving I was above all that old drama. When Daniel came in, I asked if he wanted to read over the guest list. He looked tired but nodded. His eyes paused on the last name. He said he thought we'd agreed not to do this. I said he was imagining agreements that never happened. He took a slow breath, set the paper down and said, "You always mistake defiance for strength." I told him maybe he should stop confusing comfort with love. The words came out sharper than I meant, but I didn't apologize. He walked to the sink, rinsed his coffee cup and left it upside down to dry. I followed him to the hallway, still talking, saying he couldn't control who I invited, that I refused to censor myself to protect his ego. He didn't answer. He just took his jacket and keys. The door clicked behind him, a soft, clean sound that settled heavy in the air. I stood there listening, expecting his footsteps to return. They didn't. I looked at my reflection again, told myself he'd thank me later when the night went perfectly. My phone buzzed. A text from Julian flashed on the screen. Can't wait to see the look on his face. The week leading up to the party felt like holding my breath. Daniel spoke to me only when necessary. Short, polite sentences about groceries or schedules. He didn't bring up Julian again, and I convinced myself that meant he'd accepted it. At work, I bragged about how modern our relationship was. My coworker Jenna asked if Daniel was really okay with it. I smiled and said he trusted me completely. The lie rolled off easily. People like Jenna didn't understand that confidence needed to be performed, not hidden. That Friday, I met Eva after work for drinks at the rooftop bar we used to frequent. She'd always adored Julian, thought he was the kind of man who could charm anyone. When I told her he was coming to the party, she squealed like it was gossip worth celebrating. She said Daniel would just have to level up. I laughed, pretending I wasn't nervous. She asked how things were between me and Daniel. I said fine, though the truth was, we hadn't touched or really looked at each other in days. She shrugged and said marriages go through phases, and sometimes a little jealousy wakes them up. I posted a picture of my cocktail, captioned, "Cheers to New Beginnings." Within an hour, Julian liked it. The attention soothed me. Daniel, on the other hand, didn't comment or react. When I got home, the living room was spotless, candles half burned from when I'd tested the centerpiece arrangement earlier in the week. Daniel sat on the couch, scrolling through his phone. I told him Eva said everything would go smoothly. He didn't look up, just murmured that he wasn't worried about the evening, only about what came after. I asked what that meant. He said, "You'll see." The next morning, while sorting decorations, I noticed his phone screen light up with a calendar reminder. Downtown 11:25. I teased him about being mysterious. He said it was just an errand. I pretended not to care, but something about the way he said it felt deliberate, like he wanted me to notice. Later, when I tried to talk about seating arrangements, he only nodded and returned to his laptop. I glimpsed a spreadsheet open, columns labeled expenses and documents. I joked that he was probably tracking how much of his patience I'd used up. He smiled faintly, but didn't respond. That evening, while trying on my dress, I practiced introducing Julian in front of the mirror. "Daniel, you remember Julian, right?" I imagined saying it with just the right amount of casual warmth. The thought made me grin. For once, everyone would see I wasn't just some man's quiet wife. I was someone interesting, someone people couldn't ignore. Around 9, Eva called to confirm plans for the night. She said Julian was already joking about giving a toast. I told her Daniel would be fine with it. She laughed, said I might need to film the drama. I rolled my eyes but secretly liked the idea. When I went downstairs, Daniel was setting Liam's lunchbox for the next day, his movements slow and careful. I told him Eva said everything would go well. He didn't answer. I said he was acting cold, that he could at least try to look happy. He finally looked up and said, "Happiness isn't the same as pretending." Then he took the trash out and didn't come back in for a long time. I checked my phone again before bed. Julian had sent a message. "Hope your husband's ready for a real party." I laughed quietly to myself, even though something inside me felt uneasy. The house was too quiet. Then, from Daniel's office down the hall, I heard the faint sound of paper sliding into a folder, followed by the click of a drawer closing. The night of the party arrived, like a performance I'd been rehearsing for weeks. The restaurant ballroom shimmered with gold lights and champagne glasses, exactly how I'd imagined it. I wore the silver dress Julian once said made me look untouchable. Daniel stood beside me as guests arrived, polite but distant, the kind of calm that made people uncomfortable. I smiled through it, greeting everyone warmly, determined to prove we were the perfect couple. When Julian walked in, laughter followed him like a trail. He hugged me without hesitation, his hand lingering a little too long on my waist. I saw Daniel notice. He didn't react, only adjusted his cufflinks and stepped aside. People whispered almost instantly. I heard Eva telling someone that we were all adults here. Julian started telling stories from when we dated. Funny, harmless ones, but the kind that drew attention to our history. I laughed louder than I needed to, scanning Daniel's face for a reaction. Nothing. He poured himself water, not wine, and stayed quiet. That quiet felt like mockery. When it was time for Daniel's toast, he kept it brief. He thanked everyone for coming, said he was grateful for 10 years of marriage built on lessons. That word, lessons, made me tense. Then he handed me the glass and said I should add something. I took the mic, grinning, and said marriage wasn't always easy, especially when you had a husband who took life too seriously. Some people laughed, others shifted uncomfortably. I went further, joking that Julian used to call me spontaneous, and Daniel still didn't know what that word meant. The laughter this time sounded forced. I expected Daniel to roll his eyes or shake his head. Instead, he simply smiled, the smallest, strangest smile, then sat down. I felt heat crawl up my neck. The silence after my joke stretched too long. I raised my glass and pretended everything was fine. Julian clinked his glass against mine and whispered something about me still knowing how to command a crowd. I smiled tightly, aware that everyone was watching. Dinner felt endless. Daniel chatted with other guests, but not with me. I caught snippets of conversation. Someone asking Eva if he was upset, another whispering about how bold I was. The tension became its own spectacle. Finally, Julian leaned across the table and asked Daniel if he minded taking a photo together, for old time's sake. Daniel said he didn't see the need. I jumped in, saying it would show we were all adults. Julian stood up, pulled me close, and someone from another table snapped a picture before I could think. The flash was blinding. After dessert, Daniel excused himself. I followed him out to the parking garage, heels echoing on the concrete. He leaned against the car, hands in his pockets, looking calm in that unbearable way. I asked why he was leaving early. He said there was nothing left to stay for. I laughed, told him he was being dramatic, that it was just a joke. He said, "You always confuse humiliation for honesty." I told him he was too sensitive, that he needed to learn to let things go. He looked at me, eyes tired but steady, and said, "Don't worry, I am." Then he opened the car door. I asked where he was going. He said, "Somewhere peaceful." The car engine started, echoing through the garage. I stood there in my silver dress, makeup perfect, hands trembling. When the headlights disappeared, I checked my phone, half expecting a message from him, half from Julian. There was one new notification instead, a video alert. Someone had already uploaded the moment of my toast, tagged with my name and the caption, "She really said this in front of her husband." The reflection of the screen lit my face, cold and sharp, while behind me, the garage gate clanged shut, sealing the echo of his departure. By the next morning, the video had spread farther than I thought possible. Friends, co-workers, even distant relatives had seen it. The comments were brutal, some calling me brave, most calling me cruel. I tried to laugh it off, saying people just didn't understand our humor, but inside, I felt a crawling panic. Daniel didn't come home that night or the next. He sent one short message saying he was safe and that he'd check in on Liam later in the week. That was it. I told myself he was sulking, that he'd come back once the noise died down, but deep down, I knew something had shifted. At breakfast, Liam asked if Daddy was mad. I said no, that he was just busy with work. He nodded, unconvinced, and asked why everyone online was talking about us. My stomach dropped. I hadn't realized the video was trending under our names. I told him people were just being silly, that they'd forget soon. He asked if Daddy would still come to his soccer game. I didn't have an answer. Later that day, I drove to Marianne's house, hoping she'd help talk some sense into Daniel. She opened the door, already knowing why I was there. Her expression wasn't angry, just weary. I told her everyone was overreacting, that Daniel needed to stop hiding and face me like an adult. She invited me in for tea, which somehow made everything worse. She said she'd seen the video too. I started defending myself immediately, saying it was meant as a joke, that I hadn't done anything wrong. She let me talk until I ran out of words. Then she said, "You turned your marriage into entertainment." I told her she'd always disliked me, that she was happy to see this happen. She shook her head and said, "No one's happy about it, Selene. We're just watching you keep digging." I left before I could cry. At Liam's soccer practice that weekend, a few parents whispered when I arrived. One of them smiled awkwardly and said she hoped Daniel was okay. I smiled back too brightly, pretending not to understand. When the kids took a break, Liam came running toward me, sweaty and red-faced, and asked if Daddy was coming. I said soon, and he just looked at the ground. That look stung worse than anything online. That night, Eva called. Her voice was different, muted, almost guilty. She said people at work were still sharing the clip, and that maybe I should lay low for a while. I asked if Julian had said anything. She hesitated before admitting he'd made some joke about the whole thing. That's when it hit me that he was enjoying this. I told Eva she was supposed to be my friend. She said softly, "Maybe stop talking and start listening." Then she hung up. When I got home, the house felt hollow. Daniel's side of the closet was half empty now. The drawers I used to complain he cluttered were neatly bare. A small note sat on his desk. Needed clarity. Don't wait up. I stared at it for a long time before tearing it in half. I poured myself a glass of wine and opened my phone again. More messages, more tags. I posted a picture of Liam's drawing with the caption, "Family is forever." Within minutes, the comments started again. Half pity, half outrage. I deleted it, but not fast enough. That night, as I tucked Liam into bed, he asked quietly, "Did you make Daddy sad?" The question hit like a slap. I said no, that Daddy just needed a break. He nodded, turned over, and whispered, "Then why did everyone laugh?" I sat there long after he fell asleep, staring at the wall. Somewhere in the distance, a car engine started, faint but familiar. For a second, I thought it was Daniel coming home. But it faded away, leaving only the sound of Liam's slow breathing and the phone buzzing on the nightstand, a new notification from a number I didn't recognize. The number turned out to be Daniel's work phone. The message was short, "We'll discuss arrangements soon." That was all. No greeting, no question, just a flat statement. I stared at it for a long time, trying to decode what he meant by arrangements. When I called back, it went straight to voicemail. His calmness frightened me more than any shouting ever could. Over the next week, he stopped coming by the house completely. He texted only about Liam, pickup times, school updates, small details that sounded like they were copied from a checklist. When he came to get Liam one afternoon, he didn't step inside. He waited in the driveway, engine running, eyes steady but unreadable. I asked if he was really going to keep acting like a stranger. He said this was simpler for now. I told him it was cruel. He said it was necessary. That night, I walked through the empty rooms feeling like a guest in my own house. His clothes were mostly gone, but his order remained. Drawers neat, papers filed, everything labeled. I found a folder in his old office marked Household. Inside were receipts, printed emails, and notes about utilities. It looked meticulous, cold. I felt like evidence instead of a wife. I called Eva again, desperate to talk to someone. She answered after the third try, but sounded distracted. I asked if she'd seen Daniel lately. She said no, but that he'd posted something on his professional page about personal accountability. I could hear the warning in her tone, but I ignored it. I said I was thinking of confronting him, maybe making a public statement about forgiveness. Eva sighed and said, "Selene, maybe stop posting for a while." Then she hung up. The next morning, I dropped Liam at school and decided to drive by Daniel's new place. I told myself I just wanted to see it, to understand where he was staying. The blinds were drawn, the car parked neatly in the drive. Through the window, I could see a desk with folders stacked evenly, a small lamp, and what looked like a new printer. I knocked on the door, but no one answered. I stood there long enough for a neighbor to glance curiously from their porch. I waved, pretending I was dropping something off. When I got home, another message was waiting. "Please don't come by unannounced. We'll talk soon." No signature this time. The house felt colder than ever that night. I poured a drink and opened my social media. The party clip was still circulating, resurfacing in new formats, new captions. I wanted to comment, to defend myself, but every response I drafted sounded defensive or hollow. I finally closed the app and sat staring at the dark window. In the reflection, I looked tired, older somehow. 2 days later, Daniel came by again. He stood in the doorway, said he was there to collect a few more things. I followed him from room to room, talking too fast, saying he was blowing things out of proportion. He didn't argue. He packed quietly, folded each item with precision. When he finished, he said, "This isn't a fight anymore." I asked what it was then. He said, "It's a process." I laughed bitterly and said he was acting like an accountant, not a husband. He looked at me for a long moment and said, "That's the point. I'm being careful." Then he added, "I'll handle it properly." His tone was so calm it terrified me. After he left, I stood in the hallway, shaking. From behind the closed door of his old office came a soft sound, the printer starting up again. I pushed the door open just enough to see the light blinking, paper sliding out one sheet at a time. I stepped closer and read the first line before I could stop myself. Asset list, revised. I dropped the page back, heart pounding. Outside, a car door shut, then silence. I told myself it was fine, that he was just documenting things like he always did. Still, I couldn't sleep. The printer's hum echoed in my head long after it stopped. It happened the following Saturday, bright and ordinary, the kind of day that looked harmless from the outside. I was at the community centre, helping set up for the school fundraiser. Parents bustled around carrying decorations and food trays. I told myself I was doing fine, that Daniel would have to talk to me eventually. I even dressed carefully, hoping I looked composed, someone people would root for, not pity. Liam was supposed to perform with his class, and I'd convinced myself Daniel would show up just to see him. Around noon, I saw him through the glass doors. He was early, standing by the registration table with that same measured calm I'd come to hate. He wore a simple jacket, no tie, holding a folder tucked under his arm. For a moment, I felt relieved. Maybe this was the talk he'd promised. I fixed my smile, walked over, and greeted him softly. He nodded politely, not warmly. He asked where Liam was, and I said he'd be on stage soon. He just said, "Good." I started talking too fast, saying how the online drama had cooled down, how people were finally forgetting. He didn't interrupt, just listened with that blank expression that made me nervous. When I paused, he said, "I told you I'd handle it properly." I laughed awkwardly and asked what that meant. Before he could answer, a man in a grey suit approached us. He asked my name in a professional tone. I said yes automatically. He handed me an envelope, sealed with a clear label showing my full name. I frowned, thinking it was a donation receipt. Then I noticed Daniel watching, quiet, hands in his pockets. The man said I'd been officially served and that my acknowledgement wasn't required. My stomach turned cold. I tore the envelope open with shaking fingers. The first words I saw were, "Petition for dissolution of marriage." Beneath it, temporary custody, and financial orders. My mouth went dry. I looked up at Daniel. He didn't look triumphant, just resolved. He said, "This is the right way to end it." His voice was low, even, almost gentle. I whispered that this wasn't necessary, that we could still fix things privately. He said, "You made it public. I'm just finishing it properly." A few parents nearby had noticed. I could hear whispers ripple through the lobby. Someone called out for me, asking if I was okay, but I couldn't answer. The papers trembled in my hands. I asked Daniel if he was doing this to humiliate me. He said no, that humiliation required intent, and this was just procedure. That word, procedure, cut deeper than anger. Then Liam appeared from down the hall, holding his little costume prop, smiling when he saw us together. I froze, trying to hide the papers behind my bag. He asked if we were coming to watch. Daniel knelt to straighten Liam's shirt, saying, "Of course. Go get ready." When Liam ran off, I whispered that I didn't want him to find out like this. Daniel said, "Then don't let him see you make a scene." He turned to walk away, leaving me standing in the middle of the lobby. The man in the grey suit disappeared into the crowd. Job done. I could still feel everyone's eyes on me, curious, pitying, satisfied. The envelope crinkled in my hand, heavier than it should have been. Outside the glass doors, Daniel met Marianne, who was waiting with Liam. They spoke briefly, then all three began walking toward the parking lot. Marianne looked back once, her expression unreadable. Liam waved, calling out that he'd see me later. I tried to wave back, but my hand barely moved. The doors swung shut between us, the sound sharp and final. The echo lingered long after they were gone. I stood there alone, surrounded by noise that no longer felt real, holding the end of my marriage in trembling fingers while the hum of conversation filled the silence he left behind. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.